35,000 feet above the Carolina coast, a first-class cabin holds its breath. Outside the oval windows, the sky is the particular array of something about to break. Inside, 180 people sit close enough to touch. Most of them are strangers. All of them are watching the same woman. She is in seat 2A. She has not raised her voice, not once, not in the last hour, not when skipped her with the blanket, not when they checked her boarding pass twice, not when the captain came out of the cockpit with his gold stripes and his certainty and his 4 seconds of assessment. Not even after the sound. That flat, dry sound that moved through the cabin is like something breaking. Her cheek is still warm. Her hands are perfectly still, and she is looking at her phone like someone who has been waiting, not for rescue, for the right moment. She didn't know it yet. But the woman in seat 2A was about to change everything, starting with the sound of a hand hitting her face. The gate agent didn't look up. That was the first thing Diana noticed. She handed over her boarding pass. The woman scanned it. The machine beeped. The agent's eyes stayed on her screen the entire time. Not rude, exactly, just absent. The way people are already decided when they've already decided you're not worth the effort of a second glance. Diana took her pass back, adjusted Ava on her hip, walked through the jetway. She told herself it didn't mean anything. She told herself that a lot lately. Hartsfield-Jackson at 6:31 in the morning smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. The kind of smell that lives in airports and nowhere else. Diana had been awake since 4. Ava had been awake since 3. The conference had ended the previous evening. 3 days of pediatric cardiology presentations in rooms with terrible lighting and chairs that must punish you for sitting in them. Diana had shaken hands and answered questions and smiled through all of it. Then she'd gone back to her hotel room, sat on the edge of the bed, and let herself be nothing for 20 minutes. Robert had called at 9. She'd let it ring once, then picked up. "You sound tired," he said. "I am tired. Let me send the car, Robert, or I can come myself. I'm done by noon, Robert." She said it the way you say a name when you want it to mean 4 things at once. "Stop, I love you. I'm fine. I don't need saving. I have a ticket. I have Ava. I'll be home by 3. A pause. The kind that meant he was deciding whether to push. He didn't push. "Okay," he said. "Call me when you board." She hadn't called. She'd meant to. But the coffee line was longer than expected, and Ava had opinions about everything that morning, and then the gate was boarding, and Diana was moving, and the call just didn't happen. Robert would understand. He always did. That was one of the things she loved most about him, and occasionally, quietly, one of the things that made her feel like she owed him something she couldn't name. She stopped at the end of the jetway, where the morning light came through the small oval window in the door. Gray sky, pre-dawn gray, the color of something holding its breath. Ava grabbed her collar, held on. Diana kissed the top of her daughter's head and kept walking. The first-class cabin was 6 rows. Leather seats, narrow aisle, the smell of cleaning solution and someone's cologne already settling into the recycled air. Diana found row 2, seat 2A, window. Because Ava sometimes calmed down when she could look at the sky, she settled in. Tucked Ava against her left arm. Set the diaper bag under the seat in front of her, then shifted it slightly when the buckle pressed against her knee. She looked around. A man in a charcoal suit, tablet open, not looking up. A woman with silver earrings, already leaning against her window with her eyes closed. The seat beside Diana, empty. Across the aisle, 2 rows back, a young man settling in with the boneless ease of someone who had been awake all night and was past caring. Nobody looked at Diana, which was fine. Normal, expected. She adjusted Ava against her chest and reached for the clasp of the carrier. Ava blinked, made the small sound that meant she was deciding between contentment and complaint. "I know," Diana said quietly. "Me too, baby." Her boarding pass was still in her lap where she'd placed it coming down the jetway. She looked at it once, Diana Wells. Seat 2A, Continental Sky, Flight 847, just her name, her seats, her flight. That was the agreement she and Robert had made 4 years ago, when they were still new enough to each other, that agreements felt like architecture rather than habit. She traveled as herself, not his wife, not under the shelter of his name or his position as Diana. The woman she'd been before she met him, and would still be long after any room they shared together. He'd agreed without hesitation. She'd half-expected negotiation. "There wasn't any. Why would I argue?" he'd said. "You were yourself before you met me." That doesn't stop being true. She'd loved him for that sentence for 4 years, still did. Even on mornings like this, when being just herself felt like wearing a coat with no lining in February. She looked out the small oval window. Ground crew moved through the blue-gray morning below, their orange wands cutting slow arcs in the dark. She watched them until the view was blocked by the jet bridge retracting. Then she looked at her hands. Steady. Always steady. She'd spent 12 years training her hands to be steady. Neonatal ICU, premature lungs and failing hearts, and parents whose faces held more fear than she'd ever seen anywhere else. You learned to be steady. You learned that your steadiness was a form of medicine before you gave any medicine at all. She was very, very steady. Ava yawned. Diana pulled her closer and let herself sit in the quiet for a moment before the rest of the morning arrived. She didn't know yet how little quiet was left. The flight attendant appeared the way certain people appeared, without announcement, without any sound of approach. Just suddenly present, standing at the end of the row, hands clasped in the way of someone who had found what they were looking for and was deciding what to do about it. Her name tag said Janet, mid-40s. Hair pulled back precisely, navy uniform, silver wings on her lapel catching the overhead light. Her expression was what Diana would later describe to the investigators as professionally neutral, which meant something specific. It meant the warmth had been removed on purpose, leaving only the shape of a professional interaction without any of its substance. "Good morning," Janet said. Not to Diana, to the cabin in general. She moved to the overhead bin, began pulling out blankets. Small gray squares, one for each passenger. She worked her way down the right side of the aisle. The charcoal suit got one. The woman with silver earrings got one. A man who had just settled into seat 3A got one before he'd even closed his overhead bin. She reached the natural pause between rows 2 and 3, turned back toward the galley. Diana's hands were in her lap. The boarding pass was still there. She watched Janet's back moving toward the front of the plane. She told herself, maybe she ran out. She told herself, it doesn't matter. You're not cold. You don't need a blanket. She was objectively a little cold. But that wasn't the point. The point was she was an adult who had traveled for 20 years and had never in her life flagged down a flight attendant to ask for a blanket she'd been skipped on. She wasn't starting now, except a man settled into the seat across the aisle. He'd been the last to board. Diana had seen him at the gate, still on his phone when the final boarding call came through. He was in his seat now, coat still half on, laptop already open. Janet reappeared from the galley with a blanket, which she brought directly to him. Diana looked back at the window. The ground crew had finished below. The jet bridge was fully retracted. The gate area outside was empty, except for one woman in a yellow vest doing something with a clipboard. Ordinary and unhurried, the machinery of departure proceeding as it always did. Diana breathed. Let it pass through her the way she'd learned to let things pass through her. The way you learned when the alternative was carrying it everywhere, every time, until the weight of it changed your posture. Boarding continued. The cabin filled in gradually, a couple settling across the aisle. Someone's phone playing video too loud before earbuds went in. The rolling percussion of overhead bins opening and closing. All of it the ordinary texture of a Tuesday morning flight from Atlanta to Charlotte, 93 minutes of routine and then home. She reached into the diaper bag for the formula she'd mixed in the hotel room 2 hours ago, specifically to avoid needing to do it at 35,000 feet. Always prepared. Ava grabbed her finger and held on with the full sincerity of someone who understood exactly one thing about the world, which was that this particular finger was safe. Diana let her hold it. Janet came through again with beverage service, pre-departure, orange juice, water, a sparkling option on a small tray. She moved efficiently. Glass to the charcoal suit, water to the silver earrings, juice to the couple across the aisle. She paused at seat 2A. Anything before we depart? Water would be great, Diana said. Thank you. Janet poured it. Set it on the tray without making eye contact. Began to move away. Could ice also get? I'll come back through after takeoff. Janet said it already moving. Already 2 steps past the row. Diana sat with her mouth still slightly open. She closed it. Drank the water. Across the aisle, the young man she'd noticed earlier had his phone out. Devon, though she didn't know his name yet. 21 years old, maybe 22, with the particular glaze of someone who had chosen to be awake at this hour, rather than been forced into it. There was an app open on his phone, something with a red button. He wasn't looking at it. He was half watching on the cabin with the restless attention of someone who hadn't yet decided what this morning was going to be. Diana didn't notice. She was looking at Ava, who had started to make the early sounds, the announcement sounds, the prelude. "Hey," Diana said softly. "Hey, we're going home." Ava considered this position and arrived at a different conclusion. Takeoff happened while Ava was still in the preliminary stages of discontent. Diana worked through her usual sequence, upright hold, then cradle. The low hum at the back of her throat that Robert called the sound, and that Ava had responded to since week 2 of her life. The second bottle which Diana offered, and Ava declined in the decisive way of someone who knew what they wanted, and this wasn't it. She bounced gently, hummed, tried the bottle again. Ava wasn't crying yet, just working up to something. Diana knew this escalation the way she knew her own breathing. The plane leveled at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign went off with a soft chime. Outside the window, the city of Atlanta had been swallowed by clouds. Below them was nothing but gray, flat and seamless, the clouds pressing up against the bottom of the world. Diana closed her eyes for a moment. Not sleep, just the absence of input. 11 minutes, maybe 12, where the only thing she was doing was holding her daughter and existing quietly inside the noise of the engines. She thought about Robert's coffee. He made terrible coffee. Too much water, not enough time, then drank it cheerfully, the way a man drinks coffee when coffee is a means and not an end. She thought about the kitchen at 6, in the evening, Ava and the bouncer on the counter, Robert at the stove doing something that smelled better than it looked. She thought about the specific weight of coming home to people who were glad she was there. 42 minutes, she thought. We land in 42 minutes. She opened her eyes. Janet was coming down the aisle. Beverage service, post-takeoff, juice and water and the dish of warm nuts that Continental First Class offered on flights over an hour. Diana tracked Janet's movement without making a push of tracking it. Professional at that. She tracked vitals on premature infants the same way. Steadily, without looking like she was looking. The charcoal suit, orange juice, nuts, a refill of his pre-departure water without asking. Silver earrings, sparkling water, nuts. Couple across the aisle, juice, nuts. Woman's second request for a different kind of juice handled with a small smile. Diana waited. Janet stopped at row 2. "Anything? Water, please," Diana said. "And the nuts, if there are any left." Janet poured the water, set it down, looked at the nut dish in her cart, which was clearly still more than half full, then looked back at Diana. "We're running low. I'll check and come back." She didn't come back. Diana drank her water. She was past the point of telling herself it meant nothing. She was at the point of noting it, placing it next to the blanket and the eye contact and the second boarding pass check, and letting all of it sit together in a row. Evidence of something. She wasn't drawing conclusions yet. She was just noting she was a doctor. Noting was the first step before everything else. Ava had finished her bottle and fallen into the shallow half-sleep of a baby who was not fully convinced the world was safe enough for actual sleep. Diana kept the hum going, kept one hand on the small back, felt the rise and fall of the tiny rib cage against her palm. The man who'd been seated across the aisle, the one with the laptop, began typing again. Stuart Hobbs, though Diana didn't know his name either. 58, broad through the shoulders, the face of a man who made decisions for a living and had stopped finding them difficult. He'd been his tablet since takeoff, then set it down for 10 minutes during the beverage service, then picked it up again. He'd noticed Diana during the beverage service. Not the way you notice someone to form an opinion, the way you notice a sequence and feel, somewhere below conscious thought, that the sequence is wrong. He went back to his tablet. He didn't say anything, not yet. Devon had his phone resting on the tray table. The livestream app was open. He wasn't recording. He was scrolling through the feed, thumb moving automatically, reading things he was absorbing without fully processing. His viewer count from his last stream was still visible at the top of the app. Something about that number made him feel more substantial than he actually was. He was 21 years old, and he had not yet learned to be suspicious of that feeling. 41 minutes to Charlotte. Ava woke up. The cry was the second kind. Not the announcement, the actual cry. The ones meant something was wrong and needed the world to know it immediately, without transition, without preamble. Diana was already moving before the sound fully formed. Ava vertical, shoulder to cheek. The motion. The bottle ready in her right hand. She'd been watching the escalation for 12 minutes, and she knew exactly where it was going. Ava wasn't interested in the bottle. New information. Diana tried the left shoulder. Same cry, different angle. She stood slightly to change the position, sat back, offered the bottle again. Ava declined with the full conviction of someone who had a different problem and resented being offered the wrong solution. The cry had the commitment of something that wasn't going to resolve in 60 seconds. Around the cabin, responses varied. The charcoal suit put in earbuds. The silver-earring woman adjusted her eye mask. A man 2 rows back made a sound that wasn't quite a word, but communicated clearly enough. Dev looked up from his phone. Janet appeared at the end of the aisle. She walked like someone who had been waiting for exactly this. "Excuse me." Her voice carried above the cabin noise, not shouting, directed. The projection of someone who wanted the whole room to understand this was not a private exchange. "You need to control your child." Diana looked up, kept her voice level. "I'm working on it. She's 7 months old." Other passengers paid for a quiet experience. "I understand that. She's been crying since before we took off." The NICU voice, the one that said, "I hear you and we are staying calm regardless." She cried briefly before takeoff. 30 seconds. This is the second time. Something moved through Janet's face, the calculation of someone who had expected a different response. "I'm asking you to manage the situation." "I'm managing it. She's an infant dealing with cabin pressure and schedule disruption." "I'm addressing it. Her name is Ava. She's 7 months old. She'll settle." The cabin had gone quiet under the 2 voices. Not silent, the particular quiet of people performing inattention while attending to everything. Devon's thumb stopped scrolling. He looked at the flight attendant, at the woman in 2A, at the comment feed on his screen, which had not yet started because he hadn't started recording yet. He pressed the button, not because he knew what he was doing, because something in the sequence felt like something he'd want to have later, and he was 21 years old, and that instinct was all he had. He didn't know yet whether it was the right instinct. He wouldn't know for another hour. Janet looked at the diaper bag. Gray canvas, organized and practical, not expensive looking. The bag of someone who had prioritized function over appearance, which could mean many things, and Janet chose one of them. "That bag is blocking the aisle." Diana looked at it. Under the seat, 18 inches from the aisle, nothing blocking anything. "It's not blocking the aisle. Passengers need belongings fully stowed beneath the seat." "It is beneath the seat." Janet's expression didn't change. Something beneath it did. "I need you to push it back further." Diana looked at the bag. At Janet. She thought several things quickly, chose none of them, and pushed the bag back to the same position it already occupied. "Thank you," Janet said, not like gratitude, like punctuation. She turned and walked back to the galley. Diana sat with her hands in her lap. Ava still crying against her shoulder, the water getting warm on her tray. The blanket she didn't have. The boarding pass that had been checked twice. The nuts that hadn't come back. All of it in a row, evidence of something. She wasn't drawing conclusions yet. She was noting. She was a doctor. Noting was what came before everything else. Stuart Hobbs had stopped reading his tablet. He'd put it down when Janet approached the row. He'd been reading a quarterly earnings summary that he could finish at any point, and this seemed like the thing he should watch instead. He'd watched the exchange, word for word, tone for tone. He'd watched Janet look at the diaper bag and say what she said about it, and he'd looked at the bag himself, and the bag was under the seat. He sat with that. He was a man who built things for a living. Companies, mostly. He knew how structures worked. How small decisions accumulated into large outcomes. How it seemed like a moment was usually the end of a sequence. He was watching the sequence. He wasn't sure yet what he was going to do about it. He'd spent 58 years being the man who noticed things and said nothing, and he knew exactly what that cost and exactly what it saved. And he was sitting with the math of both right now. The comment that came into Devon's early feed said, "Finally, someone maintaining standards?" Devon read it out loud, quietly, nodded slightly, automatically. Then he looked at Diana, who was trying the bottle one more time. who had not raised her voice once, whose boarding pass was still visible in her lap with Cedarsorcerer, that said she had every right to be in it. He stopped nodding. He didn't take the comment down, but he stopped nodding. That was something. The cabin had resettled into a specific quiet, not the quiet of comfort. The quiet of people who had witnessed something and were waiting to see if it was finished. Ava had been drinking for 4 minutes, steadily, with focus of someone who had been hungry after all, which meant that the crying had been entirely legitimate by any standard Diana could apply, which was all of them, being a pediatrician. She kept her breathing even, kept the motion going, watched the clouds shift outside the window, the sun somewhere behind them pushing the gray toward white. 28 minutes to Charlotte. She could do 28 minutes. She was thinking about this, the arithmetic of endurance, when Janet came back down the aisle. Not with a cart, not with anything. Just Janet, walking toward rows 2, with the particular intent of someone who had made a decision in the galley. "Ma'am." She stopped at the row, hands clasped. "I'll need to see your boarding documentation again." Diana looked at her. She'd already checked it once at the gate. Now this was the second time on the aircraft. Diana picked up the pass, held it out. Janet took it, looked at it longer than any boarding pass required, turned it over, as though something on the back might change things. There was nothing on the back. She handed it back. "Where are you connecting from?" "I'm not connecting. This is my originating flight." "And Charlotte Douglas is your final destination?" "Yes." A pause, the length of a point being made under the cover of procedure. "Thank you," Janet said. "That word, that voice, that punctuation." She turned, and Ava, who had finished most of the bottle and drifted toward the edge of sleep, chose this moment to register her final objections to the morning. Not her loudest cry, but sharp, sudden, the kind that traveled. Janet turned back. "This am undone." "She just finished a bottle," Diana said. "Same level, same pace, though it was costing more now to maintain both. She's settling. Give her 90 seconds. I've received complaints from other passengers." "I understand. You need to control this. I am controlling it. 1 degree more weight than she intended. Just 1, not anger. The pressure of someone who has been patient through a long sequence and is noting, precisely, that the patience is being spent on something that should not require it. There is nothing else to manage with." Janet's eyes moved, boarding past Diana's face, Ava, back to Diana. And something happened in that sequence Diana felt before she understood. The way she's felt changes in a patient's status before the monitor registered them. Something that had never been about Ava's crying. Had never been from the beginning. "If this continues," Janet said, "I'll need to inform the captain. Inform him of whatever you need to." Janet looked at her for a beat longer than professional courtesy required. Then she stepped forward. Her hand came up. The sound was flat and dry, the specific sound of impact in an enclosed space. Ava's cry stopped for 1 full second, then returned, louder than before. The sound of surprise added to everything else. Diana sat very still. Her cheek registered the heat of it before her brain caught up. She was still holding Ava. That was the first coherent thought. She had not dropped her daughter. She breathed, once. Twice. Janet was saying something. Words in fragments, outburst, policy. Warned. The language of someone building a story over the top of what had just happened. Devon's phone was fully raised now. No pretense of casual placement, the red light on. His face the color of someone who has documented something they cannot take back. Stuart Hobbs had put his tablet down for the last time. He'd seen the hand come up. He'd seen it come across. He sat with the full weight of what he'd watched and thought about all the times in his life he'd watched things and said nothing and told himself the situation would resolve. He thought, this is not to resolve itself. He thought the question is what to do about that. He didn't move yet. But something in him had settled. The particular settling of a man who has stopped deciding and started waiting for the right moment. The silver earring woman had pulled off her eye mask. The charcoal chute had one earbud out. 2 rows back. A span suggests something's low to the persons beside him. The shape of agreement without words. Diana adjusted Ava against her chest, breathed. Her hands were steady. 12 years of training. This was not going to be the morning that undid them. Her cheek was warm. She looked at the seat back in front of her. Gray upholstery. She let her eyes rest on it and thought one word, clearly, without drama. Okay, not rage. Shock. Okay, as in, now I know exactly where we are. She looked at the boarding pass in her hand. Diana Wells. Seat 2A. She thought about the agreement. The one she and Robert had made 4 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table with the coffee going cold, talking about what kind of marriage we're going to have. She travels as herself, not as his wife. Not under the shelter of his name, as Diana, the woman she had been before and would remain after. She had needed that agreement. She still needed it. Even now, especially now, she understood why she'd made it. Because without it, she would never know what the world did with her when she was only herself. And she needed to know. Not to punish herself with the knowledge, but because not knowing was its own kind of cost, and she decided long ago that the cost of knowing was one she could carry. She was carrying it right now. She looked at Ava. Ava had quieted again, looking at the overhead light with those enormous brown eyes, completely absorbed, turning the world over in her attention with the thoroughness of someone for whom everything was still new. Diana thought, when you're old enough to ask me about this morning, I won't remember the hand first. I'll remember your weight 8. The specific gravity of you trusting me to hold on. She held on. Outside the window, a break in the clouds. Far below, the first suggestion of the Carolina foothills. Green and brown and ordinary in the morning light. Charlotte coming. Home somewhere beyond it. 26 minutes. She had a phone in her pocket. She had a name. She had 26 minutes and a daughter she hadn't dropped and a boarding pass that said exactly where she belonged. She could wait. She had always been good at waiting. Janet Stokes walked back to the galley like someone who had finished a task. That was the thing about her stride. It didn't rush, didn't hesitate. The walk of someone who believed the outcome was settled, who had done the thing, and now the thing was done, and the rest was administration. Diana watched her go. Ava had quieted again. The sharp shock of the moment had startled her into a different kind of stillness, not sleep. Awareness. The wide-eyed inventory of a baby reacquainting herself with the world after something loud had happened in it. Diana kept her hand moving in slow circles on the small back. Her cheek was still warm, not burning anymore, just warm. The warmth that meant the body had registered something and was holding the record of it. She didn't touch her face. She didn't look around the cabin to see who was watching. She looked out the window. The cloud gap she'd seen a few minutes ago had closed. Below them was white again, flat and featureless, the clouds pressing up against everything. 29 minutes to Charlotte, she thought. I have been awake since 4 in the morning. I have been on this plane for 52 minutes. My daughter has been fed and she is calm, and we are 29 minutes from landing, she thought. Hold that. Just hold that. Stuart Hobbs had not gone back to his tablet. He sat with it, closed in his lap, and his arms on the armrests, and his gaze moving between the galley curtain and the woman in seat 2A with the methodical patience of a man who was building an account of something. Not because he'd decided what to do with it yet. Because he needed to be sure of what he'd seen before he decided anything. He was sure. He'd been sure since the hand came up. He was still deciding about the rest of it. Zevin had lowered his phone to tray table height. The camera was still running, angled up the aisle toward the forward cabin. He'd stopped looking at the comment count. He'd stopped looking at almost everything except the scene in front of him, which was someone sitting very still with her daughter and her boarding pass and her water that had been warm for 20 minutes. He thought, she hasn't called anyone. He thought, if I were her, I would have called someone by now. He thought, why hasn't she called anyone? He didn't have an answer yet. But the question was changing the way he was holding the phone, changing the angle of it, slightly. From the angle of someone capturing a spectacle to the angle of someone documenting a record. He wasn't sure when that shift had happened. He wasn't sure it was finished happening. From the galley, the sound of a radio, not words, just the crackle and static of a communication channel. Then Janet's voice, low, the words indistinct, but the tone carrying clearly enough. The tone of someone filing a report. Diana heard it. She didn't react. She was a doctor. She knew what filing a report meant. She knew what came after it. She'd been in enough situations where one person's account was the first account on record, and how much work it took to revise that account once it existed. She kept her hand moving on Ava's back. She kept her face still breaths. 1, 2, 3. Okay, she was still okay. 27 minutes. Captain Edmaro came out of the cockpit at the 47-minute mark. which was before the descent sequence. Before the approach briefing that would take him and his first officer through the final checklist for Charlotte Douglas. He'd handed the controls to his first officer and come out because Janet had radioed, and what Janet had described was the kind of situation that required a captain's presence. 20 years of commercial aviation, 16 as a captain for Continental Sky, he'd handled medical emergencies at altitude, reroutes in bad weather. A passenger who'd had a breakdown over Denver and needed 3 people to talk her through it. A fan who'd stood up on the aisle and refused to sit down for reasons that were never fully explained. He knew how to walk into a situation and take the shape of it. He walked into this one and took its shape in 4 seconds. 1. Woman, black, mid-30s, first-class SAST, traveling alone with an infant. 2. The set of Janet's face as she briefed him in the galley, which was the set of someone who was not in doubt about what had occurred. 3. The cabin, which had the texture of a room where something had recently happened, and everyone was pretending it hadn't. 4. The woman herself, who looked up at him with the specific steadiness of someone who had been expecting him. He walked to row 2. Ma'am, the captain's voice, the voice of institutional authority, carried for 2 decades and worn smooth. I'm Captain Morrow. I've been informed of a disturbance in this cabin. I'm aware, Diana said. I advise you that passenger conduct on a federal aircraft is governed by Title 49, United States Code, Section 46504. She said it the way she stated clinical facts. Not to argue, not to impress, because it was accurate and accuracy was how she operated. I'm familiar with the regulation. Morrow paused, a small recalibration. Not enough to change direction. I've received a report that you've been uncooperative with the flight crew. I've answered every question I was asked. I've complied with every instruction that was within federal regulation. Miss Wells. Diana Wells. Miss Wells. He adjusted his weight slightly, the stance of a man who has made a decision and is now implementing it rather than revisiting it. My primary responsibility on this aircraft is the safety and comfort of all passengers. I understand that. When the crew identifies a concern, I'm required to address it. Captain, she said it quietly, the way she said it in the NICU when a resident was about to make a decision that would be hard to walk back. Just the one word, carrying everything. Before this conversation goes any further, I'd like you to verify my boarding documentation. He looked at the boarding pass in her hand. He looked at her. I don't need to verify your documentation to address a conduct concern. No, she said, but you might want to. He didn't. That was the moment Stuart Hobbs made his decision. Not the slap. The slap had clarified the situation. But this was the moment that required a response, because this was the moment where a captain with 20 years and gold stripes was looking at a woman's boarding pass and choosing not to read it, and everything that followed from that choice was going to happen regardless of whether Hobbs said anything. He was going to say something. He was just waiting for the right second. Morrow picked up the intercom handset from the panel near row 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we're holding our current altitude briefly while we address a situation in the forward cabin. We apologize for any inconvenience. Behind Diana, a voice, low, impatient. Is it the baby? Another voice, the shape of confirmations without words. A third. Finally, Devon read the comment count, 14,000. He'd stopped reading them individually. The aggregate was enough. He understood the aggregate. He looked at his phone. He looked at Diana. He thought about a thing his journalism professor had said in the first week of the semester. Not about cameras or sources or ethics. Just a simple thing, almost throwaway. She'd said, the most important question you can ask yourself before you publish anything is, whose story do you think you're telling? Because you might be wrong about that. And being wrong about that is the one's mistake you can't take back. Devon was starting to think he might be wrong about that. He kept recording. He'd turned the phone slightly, so the angle caught more of the forward aisle and less of the overhead bins. Small adjustment, the kind you made when you understood what you were actually documenting. Tom Briggs had been in seat 7B since Atlanta. Middle seat, by choice. Window seats had better sight lines but made people notice you looking. Middle seats let you face forward, eyes using the slight curve of the cabin divider to take in the rows ahead. 12 years as a federal air marshal. You learn to occupy space without announcing it. You learn to make your face forgettable. You learned that the most useful thing you could be in a tense situation was invisible until the moment you needed to be otherwise. He'd noticed Diana Wells board at gate B14, not because she triggered anything, because she didn't. She boarded without performance, settled immediately, didn't make the small territorial gestures that people made when they were anxious about their space or their status. In 12 years, Briggs had learned that people who moved quietly through jetways almost never created the problems. He'd noticed Janet at the 3-minute mark. Not any single action, the pattern. The return trips past row 2 that weren't service. The quality of Janet's attention when she stood in the galley between rounds. The way her gaze tracked back to that seat with the specific frequency of someone who had formed a conclusion and was looking for confirmation rather than information. He knew that look. He'd taken out the duty phone, the one with the camera in the corner edge that read as a personal device to anyone not looking for it. He'd angled it toward the forward cabin and pressed record. He'd been recording for 31 minutes. He had the blanket. The boarding pass check, the bag, the nuts, the escalating tone of each exchange. He had the hand, all of it documented. And he'd stayed in 7B. Not because he didn't know what he was watching, he knew. He'd known since the second beverage service. But 12 years had also taught him something else. That intervening too early, before the full pattern was established, gave people room to reframe what had happened. To say, that was an isolated moment, that was a misunderstanding, that the crew member had simply been having a difficult shift. He needed the full sequence, every step of it on record, incontestable. He also needed to know whether the crew would correct itself, whether Morrow, coming out of the cockpit, would look at the situation and make a different call. That was possible. It had happened before. Captains who arrived and saw clearly and changed the direction. He'd watched Morrow take 4 seconds to assess the situation and arrive at the conclusion he'd been handed. That answered that question. And Morrow had refused to look at the boarding pass. That was the moment. Not the hand, which was already documented. This was the moment where authority was choosing to remain blind, and staying in 7B past this point meant something different than staying in 7B before it. He stood up, moved from 7B to the aisle, walked forward with the economy of someone who didn't need speed to be consequential. Stopped at row 2. Morrow looked at him. Diana looked at him. I'm Agent Briggs. Federal credentials in hand, the small card that restructured a conversation. Federal Air Marshal. I've been on this aircraft since Atlanta. Morrow straightened slightly, the reflex of institutional authority encountering its peer. Agent Briggs, I'm addressing. Captain, not a challenge. A placement. Something being said on a table where everyone could see it. I've been recording this cabin for the past 31 minutes. I have complete documentation of every interaction between Miss Wells and Miss Briggs, including the physical contact at 7:38. The phrase landed the way certain phrases land, flat, irreversible. The charcoal suit looked up. The silver earring woman had been watching since before Briggs stood. She stopped pretending she wasn't. Morrow's face worked through several things at once, none of them cleanly. Agent Briggs, I'm not asking you to change your course of action, Briggs said. I'm telling you what's on record, before any further decisions are made. Diana looked at him, really looked, not with relief. Something more careful, the look someone's placing a new piece into an arrangement that was becoming clearer. Agent Briggs, her voice dropped, just for him. You've been on this plane since Atlanta. You've seen everything. He didn't answer directly, but his eyes held the answer. Ma'am, he said, matching her register, quiet, just the 2 rows closest. If there's documentation or identifications you want on record before this proceeds further, now is the time. Diana looked at Morrow, back at Briggs. 2 minutes, she said. Morrow, you don't have 2 minutes. Briggs didn't move toward Diana. Didn't move toward Morrow either. He simply stood, and his standing was itself a fact. A federal fact, present and unhurried, that changed the weight of everything around it. 2 minutes. Diana reached for her phone. The phone screen lit up. Robert. The cabin couldn't read the name from their seats. But Devon's camera caught the glow from his angle. Caught the moment Diana looked at it. Caught the moment she declined. The active, chosen silence of a woman with her husband, on the line pressing the button that sent him away. Nobody in the cabin understood it. 27,000 people watching the stream didn't understand it either. Devon read a comment without speaking it aloud. Why won't she call someone? If I had someone to call, I'd have called them an hour ago. He turned the phone slightly, changed the angle from spectacle to record. He wasn't sure when that shift happened. He was sure it was necessary. Diana scrolled to a different name, Sandra Price. She pressed call, 2 rings. Then a woman's voice alert in the way of someone who kept their phone close during conference weeks. Dr. Sandra Price, chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Diana had sat beside her for 3 days at the Nashville conference, eaten dinner with her twice, listened to her give the keynote on Wednesday morning. Sandra had called her a remarkable physician. Diana had told her she had good residents. Diana. Everything okay? Sandra. Diana's voice was measured, each word placed carefully. I need you to conference Robert in. I need him to hear this from you first. As a witness. A beat, Diana. When he's on the line? Can you do that? 30 seconds. Diana lowered the phone, not hanging up. Lowering. She looked at Morrow, at Briggs at the galley curtain where Janet had retreated after the hand. Morrow, ma'am, whoever you're calling. 30 seconds, Diana said. He stopped. The 30 seconds expanded. The cabin held itself. Devon's count climbed past 26,000. He watched it without caring about it, which was new. The number had stopped meaning anything except that people were watching something happen and didn't yet know what it was. Neither did he. But he was closer to understanding than he'd been an hour ago. Sandra's voice, Robert's on, and Robert. His voice through the speaker at the volume Diana controlled precisely. Loud enough for Morrow and Briggs, not a performance for the cabin. Documentation. Diana. 2 syllables that held everything. Concern. Recognition. The tone of a man who knew something was wrong and was waiting to understand how wrong. Talk to me. I'm on flight 847 out of Atlanta, she said. 93 minutes to Charlotte Douglas, first-class cabin. Okay. Earlier in this flight, a member of the flight crew struck me across the face while I was holding Ava. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds is long when you're measuring someone. Are you and Ava safe right now? Physically safe, yes. Is the crew asking you to deplane? The captain is here, an air marshal. Yes. Robert's voice changed when it returned, not louder, quieter, the specific quiet Diana had learned in year 1 of knowing him. The dial that went the wrong direction. The angrier he became, the less volume he used. He was very quiet right now. I'd like to speak with the captain. Diana held out the phone. Morrow looked at it, at her, at Briggs, who gave him nothing. He took it, held it to his ear. Diana watched his face the way she watched faces in the NICU. Parents receiving news. Residents encountering the edge of their training. Colleagues in moments of reckoning. She'd spent 12 years and learning the geography of a face when the ground shifted beneath it. Morrow's face shifted, in stages. The name first, Robert Wells. Something in Morrow's expression moved like a drawer being opened that hadn't been opened in a while. The name finding a location it hadn't expected, then the title. Whatever Robert said after his name, CEO, Continental Sky. Morrow's chin dropped slightly, just slightly, the physical response of a structure losing a load-bearing assumption. Then, whatever came after the title. Morrow said nothing for 40 seconds, just listened. Then, yes, sir. He lowered the phone, held it a moment. Returned it to Diana with both hands, not the way you return something to someone with less authority than you. The other way. Robert's voice in her ear again. Are you okay? Calibration, not question. Measuring the distance between her answer and the truth. Yes, she said. Really? She thought about what okay meant at cruising altitude. With a warm cheek, with a cabin that had made its mind up about her before she finished walking down the aisle. We're okay, she said. Both of us. I've been watching the stream. She absorbed that. Since when? Since Sandra conferenced me. She had a tablet open. A pause. The weight of what he'd seen sitting in that pause. Diana, I've seen everything from the first beverage service. She said nothing. So sorry, he said. Not the reflexive sorry of social obligation, the sorry of a man who had watched something happen to his wife and had not been there to prevent it. Don't, she said. Diana. Do the thing first, then apologize. A beat, then. Okay. She looked out the window. Charlotte somewhere under the cloud cover below, the city doing what cities did at 8 in the morning, completely unaware of what was descending toward it. Robert. Yeah, I declined your first call, I know. I needed it to happen the right way. I know. No edge in it, no residue of the reasonable feelings a person might have about having their call declined while their wife was struck on their own aircraft. Just the acknowledgement of someone who understood why, who had always understood why. I know you did. She pressed her lips together. I need about 20 more minutes, she said. You've got whatever you need. His voice shifted into something more operational. I'm contacting ground operations at Charlotte Douglas now. The aircraft holds on the tarmac when you land. Nobody deplanes until federal investigators are on board. Okay, is the air marshal still with you? He's here. She held the phone toward Briggs, who stepped forward and took it. The exchange lasted 80 seconds. Briggs spoke 4 times. Robert apparently covered the rest. Then Briggs returned the phone. Done, Robert said. Thank you. Just get home. She heard choose not to say the other things he was thinking. Both of you. That's the only thing right now. She kept the phone against her ear for 3 seconds past the end of the sentence. Then she lowered it and looked at Morrow, who was still in the aisle, still in the posture of a captain, though what had filled that posture 20 minutes ago had rearranged itself into something else. Gold stripes unchanged, stance unchanged. But something structural had shifted inside all of it, and everyone in the forward cabin could feel it. He was looking at Diana the way you looked at someone when you were rebuilding an account of the last hour, and finding that each thing you'd accepted as given now wanted revisiting. She didn't have anything for him yet. That was for later. For the rooms with investigators and documentations, and the full weight of what the morning had assembled. She looked at the window, and Stuart Hobbs stood up. He unfolded from seat 1C with the deliberate care of a large man rising in a small space. He stood in the aisle, and the physical fact of him changed the air the way a presence did when it had weight behind it. He looked at Morrow. Captain, he said, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years being listened to and had learned that volume was usually the wrong tool. My name is Stuart Hobbs, seat 1C. I've been 4 feet from this woman for the past hour and 15 minutes. Morrow looked at him. She did not raise her voice, Hobbs said, at any point, through any of what happened in this cabin. He paused, let it land. I want that in the record before anything else occurs here. He sat back down. Didn't pick up his tablet. Didn't look at his phone. Just sat, hands on the armrests, eyes forward. A man who had decided to stop doing the thing he'd always done in rooms like this one. He didn't know if it was enough. He had a feeling it wasn't, but it was where you started. Devon's stream had passed 40,000. The comments had flipped, not slowly. The way a current reversed when the channel changed. One moment they were one thing. Then the name reached the comment feed through someone in the cabin, and the feed erupted and became something else. And wait, the CEO, his wife, she's been this calm the whole time, an hour. I said she was the problem. I feel sick. Devon read them. He'd stopped reading them aloud 40 minutes ago. Now he was just reading, face close to the screen, his stick doing something he didn't have a comfortable name for. He thought. I nodded at that comment. He thought. I read it out loud and nodded. He thought. The comment said finally, someone maintaining standards, and I agreed with it without looking at what was actually in front of me. He put the phone face up on the tray, still running, but he wasn't holding it anymore. He was just letting the record continue because the record was what mattered now, not his participation in it. Janet Stokes was still in the galley. She'd heard the name when it went through the cabin. Of course she had. 8 feet. A quiet room. You heard everything. She stood with her arms at her sides, and the professional posture gone and nothing left to put in its place. 44 years old. 9 years of this uniform. Coming back to work six weeks after her mother's final week in a hospital bed, because what's worse was the structure, and without structure, she didn't know how to be inside her own life right now. Coming back to a plane and putting on the jacket, and trying to be the person she'd been before the thing that changed her. Not knowing that you couldn't return to a previous version of yourself by putting on the same clothes. She thought about the sound, the flat, dry sound her hand had made. She'd replayed it 40 times in the last 20 minutes, and it still arrived to her as something that had happened in the vicinity of a decision rather than as the decision itself. Like weather, like a reflex the body made without consulting anyone, but it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. She'd known it in the moment, below everything. Below the uniform and the authority and the 9 years and the exhaustion and the grief that had nowhere to go. Below all of it, she had known a choice, not weather, not reflex, a choice about what she did when someone looked at her without flinching. When someone sat in a seat and did not arrange themselves to take up less space. When someone was exactly as present as they had every right to be. She sat down on the galley jump seat. She didn't move. She sat with the truth of what she'd done and didn't look for exits from it and let it be what it was. Outside the windows of the aircraft, Charlotte Douglas appeared through a break in the clouds, the grid of runways, the terminal arms. Ground vehicles beginning their approach, the wheels came down. And in seat 2A, Diana Wells looked at the city arriving beneath her and held her daughter and waited for what came next, which was already in motion. Had been in motion since she'd declined Robert's first call and dialed Sandra instead. Since she'd said, "I need him to hear this from you first." Since she'd understood, in the way she understood things that required patience to understand, that the right moment was not the loudest one. She had waited for that moment. She'd gotten it. The plane descended through the last 1,000 feet. Charlotte spread itself out in the morning light, ordinary and unaware, and Diana Wells sat in her seat. Both hands on her daughter, not finished. The wheels touched down at 8:09 in the morning. No drama in the landing itself, just the familiar shudder of weight meeting ground, the rush of deceleration pressing everyone slightly forward. The engines reversing thrust in that controlled roar that meant the earth had claimed you back from the sky. Ava startled, then settled, then looked around with the wide inventory of a baby reacquainting herself with a world that had briefly disappeared beneath clouds. "Hey," Diana said softly, "we made it." Ava grabbed her mother's collar, held on with both hands. Diana let her. The plane rolled toward the gate and stopped short, not at the gate. 200 feet short of it, on an open stretch of tarmac between the runway and the terminal arm. The jetway was not attached. The doors were not opening. The cabin understood this before anyone said a word. That collective shift. The passengers who had been gathering bags and composure went still again. Phones came out, not to record, just to hold, the way people held things when they were waiting and didn't know what they were waiting for. Morrow's voice on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked to hold our position briefly while ground personnel complete their approach. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Briefly. Diana had learned to hear what that word cost the person saying it. She looked out the window. 3 vehicles were moving across the tarmac toward the aircraft, white. No airline markings. Moving with the unhurried efficiency of people who had somewhere specific to be and were not in a hurry because they were already where they needed to be. Federal. She recognized the configuration from 11 years of hospital work, the way certain authority arrived. Not loud, not urgent. Just present in the way of something that had already decided the outcome before it came through the door. She looked at Ava. Ava was examining the button on Diana's collar with the full focused attention of someone for whom buttons were genuinely fascinating. Turning it, releasing it, turning it again. Diana watched her do it, she thought. In 20 years, when you ask me about this morning, I will not remember the hand first. I will remember this. Your fingers on this button completely absorbed while the world sorted itself out around us, she thought. That's the part I want you to have. The part where you didn't know. The aircraft door opened from the outside. Not the jetway door, the forward service door, swinging inward on its heavy hinge. 2 agents stepped through, plain clothes, credentials already in hand. The practiced economy of people for whom this was Tuesday. Tom Briggs met them at the threshold. The exchange was brief, professional, the shorthand of people who shared a language. Then one agent looked down the aisle. At Janet, still on the galley jump seat. At Morrow, standing near the cockpit door with his first officer in the posture of 2 men who had run out of things to do with their hands. At Diana in seat 2A, who had not moved since wheels down, the first agent walked forward, stopped at the galley. "Janet Stokes?" Janet looked up. "Yes, I need you to come with me." She stood. No argument. No appeal to 9 years of service, or the complexity of the situation, or the things that had led to this morning. She stood, straightened her uniform jacket from pure muscle memory, and then seemed to register what she was doing, and stopped. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused, not for long, 3 seconds, maybe 4. She turned and looked back at the cabin. Not at Devon's phone, not at the passengers who were watching, not at Morrow or Briggs or the agents flanking her. At Diana, just Diana, who was sitting with Ava in her lap and her boarding pass on the tray and the button on her collar being systematically investigated by small fingers. Who did not perform anything, did not meet the look with triumph or coldness, or any of the things the moment might have invited. Just sat. The way she had sat for the last 89 minutes. Janet looked for 4 seconds. Then she walked through the door. Gone. Devon had caught it. He hadn't planned to. His phone was on the tray face up, still running, and the angle caught the galley threshold in Janet's profile and the 4 seconds she spent looking. He watched it happen on the small screen. He thought, that look is going to be the thing people talk about. Not the hand. That look. Because it was the look of someone who had finally understood something they couldn't undo. And understanding things you couldn't undo was the most human look there was. He put the phone down. He was done. He had what he needed. He had more than he needed. He had 90 minutes of it, and he was going to spend a long time figuring out what to do with all of it. But he was done collecting. Morrow came next. The second agent asked him to step off. Morrow nodded, reached for his captain's hat and removed it. Set it on the jump seat. Picked it back up because he didn't know what to do without it. Held it in both hands. He stopped at row 2. Diana looked up. He opened his mouth, closed it. The architecture of what he wanted to say and the architecture of what was true were not fitting together into anything he could offer her. Mrs. Wells, he said. He got the name right this time, the name she'd told him. Captain Morrow, she said. The investigator. A pause. He nodded, walked to the door. There remained 2 flight attendants, who had spent the last 40 minutes in the rear galley being invisible, were escorted to the jetway waiting area by a third agent. They went quietly. They had the faces of people who had watched something happen and said nothing, and were now carrying the full weight of having said nothing. That weight was its own kind of consequence. The cabin sat. Nobody had told the passengers they could move. Nobody had told them they couldn't. They simply sat in the particular stillness of people who had been inside something larger than themselves and were not yet sure it was over. Stuart Hobbs was looking at the window. The woman with the silver earrings was looking at her hands. The charcoal suit had his tablet closed and his eyes on the middle distance. Devon had his phone face down on the tray, not recording, just resting there, his hand beside it, not touching it. Then something happened that Diana had not expected and could not have planned for. Hobbs stood up. He didn't say anything. He just stood in the aisle, the large, steady fact of him taking up space, and he began to clap. Slowly. Once, twice, 3 times, not the enthusiastic percussion of a crowd, the deliberate, measured clap of a man doing something he'd decided to do. The silver-earring woman stood next. Then the man in the charcoal suit. Then the couple across the aisle who had whispered things Diana had chosen not to hear. Not all of them stood. Not even most, but enough. Enough that the cabin became a different room than it had been for the last 90 minutes. Enough that the sound of it was real. Diana stopped in the aisle. She didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't raise a fist or make a speech or do any of the things that this kind of moment sometimes invited people to do. She looked at the people standing. She looked at the people not standing. She held all of it in the same steady gaze, the way she held difficult information in the NICU. Not judging it, just receiving it fully without flinching. Then she nodded once, the nod that meant I see you. All of you, both kinds. She walked to the door. The terminal was bright and impersonal the way airports were always bright and impersonal. Moving walkways, coffee franchises. The low hum of 1,000 separate journeys happening at once, intersecting and diverging without knowing each other. Morning light coming through the tall windows at an angle that made everything look temporarily significant. Diana walked through it with Briggs on one side and a she hadn't been introduced to on the other. Ava on her chest, diaper bag on her shoulder. People looked at her. Some of them had phones up. The story had moved faster than the plane. 51,000 people had been watching when Robert's name reached the comment feed. The internet did what the internet did with that kind of information. It multiplied and distributed and arrived at destinations before the original event had finished occurring. Diana looked straight ahead. She did not slow down. did not acknowledge the phones, did not perform anything for any of it. She walked through the NICU when a situation was active and she needed to be somewhere specific. The walk of a woman with a destination. The family suite was down a side corridor off the main terminal. Clean, private, antibacterial, and baby powder, the universal smell of spaces designed to serve people in their most vulnerable moments. The agent who hadn't been introduced waited outside. That was correct of him. Diana settled into the chair, changed Ava on the fold-down table. Ava accepted this with the philosophical tolerance of a baby who had been through a long morning and had no remaining objections to anything that was warm and dry. Diana fed her, did all of it with the focused attention of someone for whom the next 15 minutes were the most important minutes, regardless of everything outside the door. The world could sort itself out. Ava needed her bottle and clean clothes and the particular reassurance of being held by the person she trusted most. Everything else was secondary. Everything else had always been secondary. When Ava was fed and clean and beginning the heavy-eyed negotiation with sleep, Diana sat back in the chair and let herself be still for the first time since 4 in the morning. She thought about the morning. She let herself think about it. Not to process it, not to slice it into some larger narrative that made it mean something redemptive. Just to hold it the way you held a difficult fact. Without looking away, the blanket, the boarding pass, the bag, the nuts, the second boarding pass check, the escalating quality of attention that was not customer service, the hand. She held all of it. Her cheek had stopped being warm. It was just her cheek again, which was its own kind of thing. The body's insistence on returning to baseline, on normalizing the extraordinary, on moving forward whether or not you'd finished with what was behind you. She was not finished with it. She didn't think she ever would be, entirely. That was honest. Some things didn't finish. They became part of the material you were made of, woven into the way you moved through rooms from that point forward. She thought, this morning is going to be part of me forever. She thought, it was going to be part of me regardless of how it ended. She thought, at least now it ends with something that matters. The agent knocked twice. Mrs. Wells, whenever you're ready. 1 minute, he said. She looked at Ava, who was asleep. Fully, finally, completely asleep. The heavy limb-slack sleep of a baby who had earned it. 1 more minute, Diana said to no one. She sat with her daughter and let the minute pass. Then she stood up. The statement took 43 minutes. The agent was thorough without pressure. Legal pad. Pen. He noted everything Diana gave him in the order she gave it. The blanket, the boarding pass, the bag, the beverage service, the escalation through 5 distinct stages, the words that preceded the hand itself, 3 clarifying questions, all about sequence, none about interpretation. When she finished, he looked up. Anything else you want included? Diana thought. Yes, she said. I want to note that the other flight attendants on that aircraft were professional throughout. This isn't a statement about an airline. It's a statement about one person's pattern of assumptions and about a system that made it easy for that pattern to go unexamined. He wrote it down, word for word. Thank you, Dr. Wells. Wells is fine, she said, just Wells. He wrote that down, too. She carried Ava to the family waiting area near gate C12, found a corner chair, ordered coffee from the kiosk across the corridor. Not because she needed more caffeine, because having something warm in her hands felt like a form of stability. She sat. She let herself think about the morning, not to find meaning in it, not to organize it into something that felt earned, just to hold it the way you held a difficult fact, without flinching, without looking away. The blanket, the boarding pass, the bag, the hand, all of it in a row. Her cheek had stopped being warm. It was just her cheek again. The body's insistence on returning to baseline, on moving forward, whether or not you'd finished with what was behind you. She was not finished with it. She thought, this morning is part of me now, woven in. That's not a tragedy. It's just true, she thought. At least now it ends with something that matters. In a holding area 2 corridors away, Tom Briggs sat across a table from Janet Stokes. No performance in the room, no observers. Just the 2 of them, a small recording device between them that Janet had agreed to without argument. Briggs had done this kind of conversation before. After incidents, after the moments where the sequence had finished and what remained was trying to understand how the sequence assembled itself. He didn't approach it with anything in particular. Not accusation, not sympathy either. Just the patient attention of someone who actually wanted to understand what had happened. "Walk me through your thinking," he said. From when she boarded, Janet looked at the table, then at him. She talked for 11 minutes, not defensively, but not with the organized certainty of someone protecting themselves, more like someone trying to locate themselves in their own account of events. The mother, the 6 weeks. Coming back to work and finding that the uniform felt different than it used to feel, felt like a claim she wasn't sure she was still making accurately. Seeing Diana board, the specific quality of what she'd felt when she saw Diana settle into that seat. Something she didn't have a clean name for, but knew had been there. "And when she looked at you," Briggs said, "during the second exchange, what happened then?" Janet was quiet for a moment. "She looked at me like she belonged there," Janet said. "Like there was no question about it." There wasn't a question about it. "I know," she said it flatly, without deflection. "I know that. Then what was the problem?" Janet had looked at the table again. "This took longer." "I think," she said slowly, "the problem was that I looked at her and felt like she belonged there more than I did." She paused, and I didn't know what to do with that. Briggs didn't respond immediately. He sat with what she'd said the way you sat with something when it was more honest than you expected. "You could have left her alone," he said. "Yes," Janet said. "You chose not to." "Yes." The word sat between them. Briggs leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Stokes, what you did on that aircraft is a federal offense. We're going to process this accordingly. But I want to ask you something separate from all of that." She looked at him. "That answer you just gave me," he said. "About belonging. I need you to hold on to that. Not as punishment, as the beginning of an understanding what happened this morning. Because most people spend a long time not being able to say what you just said." Janet looked at him steadily. "It doesn't change what I did," she said. "No," Briggs said, "it doesn't. But it's the only honest place to start." She nodded. Once. Small. They finished the interview 20 minutes later. Janet was escorted to a federal processing area. She went without resistance. She went with the specific quiet of someone who had stopped looking for exits. Briggs walked back to the family waiting area. He saw Diana in the corner chair, with her coffee and her sleeping daughter, and her boarding pass visible in the pocket of her diaper bag. He stopped. "Mrs. Wells," she looked up. "I wanted to tell you personally," he said. "The interview is complete. The documentation is complete. It's going to federal prosecutors this afternoon." Diana nodded. "There's also something she said," Briggs started, then stopped, reconsidered. "I don't know if you want to know what she said." Diana was quiet for a moment. "Was it honest?" she asked. "I think so." "Then yes," she said. "I want to know." He told her. Diana listened, looked at Ava, asleep on her chest, looked at Briggs. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, "That's the most honest thing anyone said this morning." "I thought so too," Briggs said. He nodded once. Left. Diana sat with what Janet had said the way she sat with difficult information, without rushing to a conclusion about it, holding it as what it was, which was complicated, which was the kind of honest that was too late but still counted for something. She looked at her coffee, cold now. She drank it anyway. The agent knocked on the door frame. "Mrs. Wells, your husband is in the terminal." She looked up. "Which direction?" she said. Robert held the press conference at the regional office at 3:30. Not at the airport, which was still technically a federal scene. At the office, because Robert had spent 20 years learning to be deliberate about where he stood when he said things that mattered. He stood behind a lectern with no notes. He said, "A member of our crew committed a federal assault against a passenger on this aircraft. The passenger was my wife. I am not standing here because she is my wife. I am standing here because she is a passenger, and what she deserved from this company has nothing to do with who she is married to," he said. "We are providing the Department of Transportation and the FAA with full access to every piece of documentation from this flight. Every camera, every audio record, every crew report. We are not asking for time to conduct an internal review. We are asking the federal agencies to conduct the review, and we will give them everything they need," he said. "I have watched the complete recording from this morning. I have watched it from the first beverage service through the landing. And I want to say something about what I saw." He stopped, looked at his hands, looked back up. I saw what most of us see every day in every room, in every line and aisle and waiting area. I saw assumption arriving ahead of evidence. I saw a uniform becoming permission for something a uniform was never meant to authorize. I saw a cabin full of ordinary people do what ordinary people do when someone in a position of authority acts certain. He paused. They believed the certainty. He looked at the journalists in front of him, at the cameras, at the room. My wife has been traveling alone for 20 years, he said, long before she met me. She has been exactly herself in every seat, in every terminal, on every flight she has ever taken. And she has paid a cost for that. A cost that doesn't appear on any incident report. A cost she has carried quietly because that is what the world has required of her. She carried it this morning, too. Another pause. I am asking to be the kind of company that eventually makes that cost unnecessary. I don't know how long that takes. I know what the alternative is. I'm not interested in the alternative. 3 questions. 3 direct answers. He left the lectern. Diana watched it from the family area on her phone, Ava in her lap, awake now, interested in the phone screen without understanding what was on it. She watched Robert's face when he looked at his hands. She knew what that was. She'd seen it before, in private. The moment he stopped managing and let something through. The thing underneath the competence and the authority and the careful deliberateness. Just a man who loved his wife and was standing in front of cameras trying to do something worthy of her. She texted him 1 word. Good. He texted back in 30 seconds. Was it enough? She looked at Eva, who had found the corner of Diana's phone case and was investigating its texture with the thoroughness of a scientist. She typed, "It's a start." She put the phone away. She looked at her daughter. She thought, "You are going to grow up in the world that starts today." She thought, "I don't know what that world looks like yet," she thought. But it starts today, and that's something. Ava looked up at her with those enormous brown eyes, direct and uncomplicated, the look of someone who had not yet learned to be anything other than completely present. Diana pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head, held her there, just held her. The federal investigation took 11 weeks. Which was fast for federal anything. Briggs testified to everything he'd recorded and witnessed. Devon's footage was entered into evidence along with the aircraft's own audio documentation. The recording quality was sufficient to make the sequence of events clear, unambiguous, and complete. Janet Stokes did not contest the charges. At the preliminary hearing, her attorney read a statement on her behalf. It said, Ms. Stokes acknowledges that her actions constituted assault under federal law. She acknowledges that no crew protocol authorized those actions. She accepts the legal consequences of her choices. The word choices had been Janet's specific request. Her attorney had told her it might not help the case. She'd said she knew. She'd asked him to keep it anyway. The judge in sentencing was an older woman with gray hair and the face of someone who had been receiving difficult information for 30 years and had stopped being surprised without ever stopping to care. She read the sentence. 14 months suspended, 2 years probation. Mandatory participation in a federal bias awareness program, ongoing for the duration of probation. Permanent revocation of aviation credentials. Then she set down the paper. Ms. Stokes, she said, I've read your full statement to investigators. Not the required portions. The section at the end where you were asked why. Janet looked at her. You told them that you struck that passenger because she looked at you as though she belonged there more than you did. The judge that's it for a moment. I want you to hold on to that answer, not as punishment, as a beginning. Because that answer is more honest than most people manage in a lifetime. What you do with it from here is what remains. The courtroom was quiet. Janet nodded, one small nod. In the parking structure afterward, she sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine. The word beginning moved through her mind. Strange word for a courtroom. Strange word for a Tuesday afternoon in January. Strange and necessary in the way of things that arrived without being invited, but turned out to be exactly what was needed. She sat with it. Then she started the car. Devon posted his video at 6 in the evening, 3 days after the flight. Not the raw live stream. He'd taken that down on the tarmac at Charlotte Douglas, standing at the gate window with his phone in his hand, watching the federal vehicles around the aircraft route, and understanding finally and completely that he had been wrong about the story he was in. What he posted instead was a 12-minute edit, Every exchange in order with nothing removed and nothing added. The full shape of the morning, from the first beverage service to the moment Janet looked back from the door. His caption went through 4 drafts. The final one said, "I started filming this because I thought I knew what I was looking at. I was wrong. I'm posting this because I think the rest of us need to see what we looked like while we were being wrong. I did. I don't feel good about it. Feeling bad isn't enough either. I don't know yet what enough looks like." The woman in seat 2A never raised her voice. Not once, the entire time. I don't know how she did that. I hope someday I understand it well enough to stop needing to ask. He posted it, made ramen because he hadn't eaten since before the flight. By the time the ramen was ready, the video had 400,000 views. By the time he finished eating, it had passed 1.5 million. He washed the bowl, went to bed, did not check his phone until the following morning. In the morning, there were messages from 3 documentary production companies, a journalism fellowship program, and his professor, who had written only, "Come see me this week. Bring the original footage." He went to see her. He brought the original footage. She watched all 91 minutes of it without speaking. When it was done, she said, "You made the wrong call at the beginning. You knew it before the flight landed. And then you told the truth about it publicly. That's rarer than you think." Devon said, "It doesn't undo what I did." "No," she said, "it doesn't, but it's the only thing that moves it forward." She handed Bempa. He took it. Stuart Hobbs sent a letter, handwritten. On paper he'd had to look for in a drawer that hadn't been opened since he moved into the current office. He wrote 2 paragraphs. The letter arrived at Continental Sky Corporate and was forwarded to Diana at home with a handwritten sticky note from Robert's assistant that said simply, "Thought you'd want this one." Diana read it, standing at the kitchen counter. The first paragraph said that he had almost stayed silent. He wanted her to know the specific weight of that almost. He was not asking for credit for not staying silent. He was telling her because he believed she deserved to know precisely how his testimony had cost him, and that the cost was considerably less than what she had been paying, and that knowing the difference was going to change how he moved through rooms from this day forward. The second paragraph was 2 sentences. I hope that means something. Diana folded the letter, put it in the kitchen drawer, the one where she kept the things she didn't need to look at every day but did not want to lose. She stood at the counter for a moment. Then she filled a glass of water, drank it, got back to the rest of the evening. Continental Sky's new training program launched 8 months after the flight. Robert had asked Diana what to name it. She'd said, "Don't put my name on it. I'm not a lesson plan." He'd said, "Then what?" She'd said, "Name it after the problem, not the person got hurt by it." They called it the Presumption Protocol. 40 hours of mandatory training for every crew member. Not abstract seminars, not diversity workshop talks that happened once and were filed away. Specific, scenario-based, built the precise kind of small, accumulating assumptions that had struck a Tuesday morning from something ordinary into something that would feature in federal aviation reports for years. Robert brought in outside consultants, people who spent careers studying how ordinary people made poor decisions inside institutional structures. How uniforms changed things, how aisles changed things, how the architecture of authority made certain conclusions feel inevitable when they were not inevitable at all, but were simply the conclusions that the structure made easiest to reach. The first cohort completed training over 18 months, 640 crew members. The pass rate on scenario assessments was 89%. Robert terminated the 11% who failed. The union pushed back. He understood the pushback. He didn't change the policy. He said, in the meeting where the pushback reached him formally, "The scenario assessments are not difficult. They describe situations where a crew member must choose between their assumption and the evidence in front of them. If 11% of our crew cannot reliably choose the evidence, I don't know what else to do with that information except act on it." The meeting ended. 14 months after Flight 847, a woman named Yvonne took a flight from Dallas to Baltimore. She was 61 years old, retired school teacher, 32 years in a 6th grade classroom in Fort Worth, Texas. She'd flown before, not often. Flying was expensive, and she'd spent most of her adult life making sensible decisions about expensive things. Seat 24C, economy. A rolling carry-on, a purse, a novel she'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks and kept not finishing because something always interrupted her at the same chapter. The flight attendant came through with beverage service. Efficient, functional. Not warm or cold, just the texture of someone doing a job without particular thought about the doing of it. Yvonne asked for orange juice. Got it, said thank you. The attendant moved on. A woman in the window seat of the next row asked for the same thing. The attendant smiled. It was small, it was brief. It was the kind of thing you noticed only if you'd been noticing things like it for 61 years. Yvonne had. She looked at her orange juice. She thought about the story she'd read 8 months ago. A woman in a first-class seat on a Tuesday morning. The sequence of small things. The hand. The 93 minutes of sitting still and waiting for the truth to arrive at its own pace. The way Diana Wells had declined her husband's first call and dialed a witness instead. She thought about Devon's video. She'd watched it twice. The second time Pissant paused at the moment Janet looked back from the door. She'd sat with that image for a while. Because it was the most human image she'd seen in a long time. The image of someone finally understanding something they couldn't undo. She thought about Hobbs in the aisle, almost stayed silent. I hope that means something. She took out her phone. She didn't film anything. She didn't post anything. She pulled up the Continental Sky Passenger Advocacy page, bookmarked months ago, and opened the Presumption Protocol feedback form that had gone public 6 months after the flight. She had nothing specific to report today, just the texture of a morning, a smile given one direction and not another. The small weather of it, but she saved the form. She saved it because knowing the door there was its own kind of thing. She opened her novel, read 5 pages without stopping, the most she'd read in 3 weeks. Diana flew again on a Tuesday in March. Continental Sky, Charlotte to Nashville, returning from a 2-day pediatric pulmonology conference. She'd booked her own ticket this time, saw the seat number when she printed the boarding pass at the kitchen counter the evening before. 2A. She stood at the counter and looked at it. Robert was at the table behind her, working on something she hadn't asked about. He'd been at it for an hour. She could see from the quality of his attention that it required him fully. She looked at the boarding pass, put it in her bag, didn't say anything about it. In the morning, she took Ava, 12 months old now, recently and triumphantly walking, approaching every surface in the house as a potential handhold, to Robert's mother's house at 6:30. Ava went with the cheerful indifference of a child who had not yet learned to be diplomatic about her enthusiasm for grandmothers. Diana drove to the airport. At the gate, the agent scanned her pass, looked up. Have a great flight, Doctor. Wells. Diana said thank you. Walked down the jetway. The cabin was the Xia cabin, or one built on the same template. She found row 2, set her bag under the seat, checked the buckle, adjusted it once. She sat. Just sat for a moment before she did anything else. Other passengers were boarding around her. The ordinary percussion of overhead bins and armrests and someone's bag that was half-inch too wide for the space it needed to occupy. All of it the texture of a Tuesday morning at 35,000 feet. The flight attendant came through. Young woman, different face, the warmth of someone who had thought about her job and decided to be present in it. She stopped at row 2. Blanket? Please. The blanket arrived. Thin, slightly scratchy, the same gray that every airline blanket had been since Diana started flying at 22. It would make her approximately 40% warmer than without it. That was all it was ever going to do. It was enough. She spread it over her lap, looked out the window. The gate area below was busy with the choreography of a Tuesday departure. Ground crew, a fuel truck moving at its specific unhurried pace, a plane on the far runway, small in the distance, nose-lifting. She let herself think about the morning 14 months ago. Not to arrive somewhere, not to organize it into a lesson or a turning point or any of the shapes that people put on difficult things to make them bearable. Just to think about it the way she thought about it in the small spaces of ordinary days. On the drive to the hospital, in the shower at 6 a.m., at the kitchen counter after everyone else was asleep. She thought about the blanket she hadn't been given. About the hand, about sitting still afterward and not dropping her daughter, about declining on Robert's burst call, about what Janet had in the holding room, which Briggs had told her, which she had held ever since with the careful attention you gave to something that was true and painful, and not entirely without use. About Hobbs unfolding from seat 1C, about Devon lowering the phone, about Robert at the lectern looking at his hands. About Yvonne somewhere with her saved form and her open novel, about all of it, the full shape of one morning. What it cost, what it left behind, what other people were moving through now because of it. She looked at her hands in her lap. Steady. They were always steady. The engine started. The gate fell away. The plane began to move, and Diana Wells sat in seat 2A and let it carry her. Not because the world had become easy, not because the mornings had stopped requiring things of her, but because she was here, in her body, in her name, in the seat she had paid for and held and was holding still. The ground fell away. Charlotte spread out below in the early light, the highway grids, the rooftops, the trees showing the first pale green of spring. The city where her family was, where Ava was pulling herself up on the kitchen table right now, probably, investigating every surface with a methodical ambition of someone from whom the world was still entirely new. Diana watched her city until the clouds took it. Then she looked forward. She thought about what Robert had said once, early in their marriage, in a conversation that had been about something else. One of those sentences that arrived in context and lived much longer. He'd said, "The thing about you is that you never stopped being the person you were before anything happened to you." She'd disagreed at the time. She'd said, "Everything changes you." He'd said, "I know. I didn't say it didn't. I said you never stopped being her." She thought about that. At 35,000 feet, seat 2A, blanket on her lap. She was not the same woman who had boarded flight 847 14 months ago. And she was entirely herself. Both things had always been true. The clouds went white below her, and the sky went blue above, and the plane found the altitude it was made for, and Diana Wells looked at all of it without looking away. Going somewhere, still here,